previously. So if I can, is it
Okay.
started?
Yep.
Right. Right. Share this, and this is what I'm meaning. Um, the uh, the real gold dust and the amplification that I'm getting is by just having a description of the system. So I've just stuck this in a few minutes ago, just before coming on the call. Okay, so here's a description of a system. What
Yeah.
you want to say? Just go say, okay, so that is the definitions. Um, go down to the next bit. Hold music, hold music, hold music, hold music. Your call is important to us. Right. Okay. So
13,000 tokens in.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Okay. Right. Right. Generate user stories. Now, this is what
That's what
we've
I was
got for
saying.
free.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But the thing is, this is derivative of the definitions. So remember, I was saying that
Yeah.
the base rock is the important thing. So
Yeah.
you
I
build
get
it up
that.
and then you
But so
reduce it.
what? So what is my question?
So what is you shouldn't be, or I believe we shouldn't be using the user stories because
What?
being derivative, there is noise added. So
You
if
mean
you then
you're talking about user stories that are derived entirely from the definitions, right?
those are fine, but then
What?
deriving anything from those user stories
Well, what's the point? What's
is
the point
suspect.
of having the ones derived from the definitions if you're not allowed to use them for anything more? What's the point?
Because if you want user stories, you put them into the definitions. You don't derive them.
Yeah, but okay. The user stories I showed you are not
Hmm.
derived, they are extracted from transcript, which means
Right,
that
but
our meat brain, thought that they were important.
yeah, yeah. But the thing is, you wouldn't allow the user stories then to alter, unless there's something wrong. The transcript is the base rock. It's the
No,
thing that
well,
you change.
nah, it's not. Base rock, and I think you need to define base rock because you use it a lot. Base rock
Hmm.
is not conversations. Conversations can be wrong. Base rock is the reconciled stuff against all previous conversations, picked over, refined, drilled on. That's different. That's
Yes, but
the
it's what is the target you're giving the AI to consider? That's what I mean by base rock. Is
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah, yeah.
this is the truth?
Which isn't the conversations that you and I have. It's the resulting output of it.
Right, right.
Yeah,
And
but
that
I
is
don't get the point of what you're saying. Of like, sure, user stories can be derived from definitions, or they can come from conversations. But what's the point in saying don't use the user stories?
um, the danger, and maybe I picked you up wrong, but the danger is ignore the you derive from the definitions, the user stories. Now ignore the definitions from the user stories. I want to like check this system. You've always got to go back to that base rock, whatever that base rock is.
That makes no sense, dude. What do you like? Why are you
Well, for
trying to kill the
example,
user stories?
no, I'm not trying to kill them. I'm trying to
Okay.
say if they're useful,
Yeah.
you put them inside of the definitions.
No.
Well, why?
So you're saying
Because
that you want the user stories to be canonical, uh, you're saying that you wanted them to be not derived from definitions, but extracted from conversation and reconciled against definitions.
yes, but
Yep.
the
Okay.
reconciliation is the thing. Yeah, you always
That's what I want.
reconcile against. Yeah,
That's what I'm trying
but
to do.
what it sounded, and I probably got you wrong, but what it sounded what you're saying is a whole bunch of user stories fell out of this. That's great. Let's use those user stories in order to do, I don't know, like testing or a
No,
definition, a second level.
those user stories came from. They did not fall out. They were not derived. They were extracted from the conversation.
So, what's
And
the
you were the synthetic part.
Yep.
You were asking about the it was the synthetic user stories that triggered you there, right?
Yeah.
Because you thought that synthetic meant generated from definitions, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
that's not at
uh,
all what synthetic was. Synthetic, in the document I showed you, was saying that go through the transcription and generate any user stories that were kind of like half started or hinted at, because often we'll start a user story and then won't finish it, or
so
you know
okay.
what I mean?
So
That's what I
from
meant by synthetic
right
means it wasn't clearly described in the transcription. It was implied, or something in the discussion topic warranted capturing it as a user story.
okay. No, that makes more sense.
Okay.
Those user stories you then um, uh, add into the definitions.
Well,
The
they're
definitions
not
are
the
the thing.
definitions. They're separate. That's why I made them a separate pathway here, because they stay like definitions and stories are separate because they're a different type of information.
And this is, I think, where we're diverging. But I'm getting really good results on this one. If you have a single source of this is what we're talking about,
Yeah.
um, and sure, you can get a transcript and generate user stories. The next step would be to reconcile those user stories back to the definitions.
Yeah,
Like,
so that
where do they
so
conflict?
when I talk about gold stories use only terms from the definitions to describe how everything in the definitions relates and interacts.
Yeah, so there could be, we've been talking in the transcript, and the transcript implies a bunch of user stories. The next step would be to take those user stories and saying, do any of these user stories conflict with the definitions, which is
Or the previous
changed,
gold stories.
right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Well,
But a story is not a
the
definition.
code definitions.
A story is not a definition because definitions are statements and stories are the interactions of those statements.
Yes. However, the definitions should be complete enough that you can derive them, and I just showed you how
Wait, the definitions should be complete enough that you can derive what?
derive user stories,
That's not true.
derive sequence diagrams.
That's never true. The definitions should not be that complete because otherwise you've intermingled two different types of data.
No, I disagree because the definition should be absolutely logical and coherent, and
That doesn't
therefore
mean that. But
the
why would a story is built entirely from definitions? Definitions aren't built from definitions.
no definitions are the there's no more turtles. That's it. That's the
That's
last
right.
turtle.
Yeah, but stories are built of turtles.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
and so they are a separate thing because they depend on another thing.
right, which is why I was talking about user stories being a render. So a render being anything you take from definitions and
No,
saying,
no, no.
give me a bunch of user stories.
Just because you depend on another thing doesn't mean you depend exclusively on another thing. User stories are extra information plus dependency on definitions. It is not sufficient to have the definitions alone will not give you the user stories. They contain extra
But
information.
I respectfully disagree in that definitions are the thing that should be getting ever closer to the absolute truth. And if you add in extra information and generate user stories, then you should be referring those back to the definitions and saying, where does this conflict? And
So
then
what do you
the
want to
thing that
change in this diagram then?
the so the reconciliation is the thing, right? So you apply corrections on each of those. That's all fine. Reconciliation needs to be against the gold definitions. It's not at the same level as gold stories, which you can generate, just have gold tasks. you can generate the conflict detection is part of reconciliation. It's like reconciliation is like, okay, so in a conversation, we've been talking about a thing that previously was agreed, and what we said disagrees with definitions. What do you want to do? Do you want to change the definitions or discard, the conflict?
So what? Hang on, that doesn't sound like a change to the diagram. That just sounds like it follows the diagram. You said you didn't. You want to get rid of gold stories?
No. Ghost stories are fine, but it's just a render. I could render.
Where
You're talking.
when
I
you
was
say
talking.
render, you mean something that's generated entirely from the definitions,
Yes, precisely. In one
right?
step. That's the important thing. In one step.
Well, that's not what I've been using stories for. Stories are invented by you and me.
Yes, but when you and I talk, what's the record of our agreement?
Sorry? Well,
Um,
I don't know
so
what you
you,
mean.
you and I talk, and we could generate user stories. Cool,
Yeah,
that's fine.
yeah.
Now, your idea of user stories, my idea of user stories, is in those user stories. However, we are talking about user stories in terms of what the base rock is, which is the truth. The thing that's self-coherent. Now, say if we wanted to add in a user story because we chatted and we're both talking away on whatever, and we decide, oh, we want to add in something absolutely ridiculous which breaks the entire system. That user story could still be a user story,
How could
as
how
it.
could you how could you make a user story that breaks the entire system if you built it off of the gold definitions? Like what would have broken? The stories
Um,
can't make definitions.
this is the point. When you transcribe two conversations,
Yeah.
and let's say derived from those where funders should only ever pay in cows ever and can't talk to anyone. That needs to be reconciled back to definitions because that
Yeah.
breaks a whole bunch of rules.
Yeah, but that's the definition. Funders can
Yeah.
only pay in cows as a definition.
No, it's that's the reconciliation. It's like we've
Okay.
got inside
What's the
definitions
point
you
though?
can
What's the
pay.
point? You were saying the point is, and then you said what you just did, and that's not the point. That's not a point. And I'm not.
Well, the point is it's very, very dangerous to go to a second order derivative of take the conversations, bunch of user stories, and then we're implying that just because you and I think we know what the definitions are, but we're not referring it back to the definitions, so we haven't actually reached agreement.
But the
We've got a
whole
bunch of user
point of all
stories.
this is about reaching agreement on the definitions at the
Yeah.
same time as reaching agreement with the stories. I can't help but thinking that there's something going on here that's pointless. Like I'm not seeing a clear point from you that indicates change of any kind. You're just sort of
Well, my
saying,
my my point maybe is I misunderstood what you're saying about user stories, but you were very enthusiastic that user stories just fell out of what you're doing, and it's like, well, yeah, sure. User
I
stories,
repeated several times that the user stories that I listed were not derived from the definitions. They were built on the definitions and they were extracted from the stories, the transcripts, but they were not in
yeah,
complete
yeah,
clean room environment. I did not take the definitions and then generate stories from those definitions.
okay,
I
good, good,
don't
good.
think you can.
Because
I don't
yeah,
even
well,
see how you could do that.
the thing from the transcripts, and you generate a whole bunch of user stories. You could generate a whole bunch of things from the
I didn't
transcripts,
generate
right?
them, I extracted it.
Right. Well, the AI, derived from the transcripts. This is user stories, and then you prompted it saying, "Is there anything we've missed?"
Yeah,
Which is an easy enough prompt.
yeah.
And okay, so now we've got something that's derived from two transcripts. The point I'm trying to make is that is that has to be reconciled with the definitions.
Correct. Yeah,
Now,
and I don't know how many more times I can just go, yeah, sure. Like,
okay,
how is that a
all right.
point when I keep saying yes?
Okay,
How is it a point?
because it sounded like you're saying that the user stories were a thing that you could then build on. It's like,
Well, I'm gonna build on
no,
them. That's why the box ends there. Because I'm gonna build on those stories and make sure that the system that I'm building in code is able to operate using those stories based on those definitions.
okay, so if I were to talk in more hard terms in this diagram, the reconciliation of all these things is around the gold definitions, which includes conflict detection.
The reconciliation step is about adding a new source when you've got existing gold level things. When you get a new source, like for example, this conversation that we just had, it goes through the extraction process to get these 3 different channels of independent classes of information. And then the reconciliation step is taking each one of those 3 classes and reconciling it back against the gold standards that already exist. So, for example, when I take the user stories that we have discussed here tonight, after applying corrections that match them up with the definitions, I will then reconcile those stories against the gold stories to look for deduplication, conflict, or ideally what I want is new user stories that I can expand the gold stories with.
Right. Okay. So what happens after this reconciliation? We've got 4 things: gold definitions, stories, tasks, conflict detection. And I know this is generated, by the way. So it's
Well, it's generated, but I
verification.
stand by it. Like I
Okay.
didn't just generate it and be like, oh well, there you
Right.
go.
Okay.
I checked it
Okay.
and I agree with it.
So at the moment, this diagram looks like it's applying reconciliation to the extracted information,
Yes.
and then dumping it into definitions, stories, goal tasks, etc.
Well, it's supposed to be showing that it's reconciling with the existing gold definitions so that the new information that came in, be it
Yep.
definitions, stories, or tasks, is reconciled against the gold standard that's already there. And why it sort
Right.
of goes through a central box is number one, because the diagram looks wonky if you have a step for each one. But more importantly, the reconciliation, like if I want to reconcile an incoming story with the gold stories, I also need to be reconciling with the gold definitions as well to make sure that the story is being converted into the gold language and then reconciled with the gold stories. That's
Okay.
why
So
it sort of
um,
intermingles a bit there.
where do you go for the source of truth if goal definitions and goal stories disagree?
Gold
I know they've got
definitions and gold
reconciliation there, but
stories. What?
the rec, rec,
If
the
they
recon,
dis.
the conflict detection and reconciliation
Yeah.
it needs to be stored somewhere.
You mean if the incoming input story does not reconcile with the gold definitions and gold stories, you mean?
What I mean is input goes through this, and then reconciliation. That reconciliation has a result through conflict detection, and updates the gold is underneath the thing, so I can't actually see what it says. Uh, update gold conflicts. Okay, but I would say update gold definitions, and then you can reliably extract gold stories, gold tasks, gold narratives, gold diagrams, anything you want. But that reconciliation has to be stored somewhere in a thing. Now, whether it's
What?
hierarchical and so on, but it is
You
conceptually
lost
one
me
thing.
again, buddy. Like the gold stories. Can we just deal with stories for the sake of the example? So I try and get to the bottom of what you're digging at.
Mm.
So I've got an extracted story, and I've got the list of gold stories, and I'm trying to reconcile the extracted story with the gold stories. Right? Is that an acceptable scenario?
So you got stories only, and you're going through, and
We're only considering stories for the sake of simplicity here.
Yep.
I've got an extracted set of stories. I've gone through the corrections, and let's assume for argument's sake that it's the extracted story has been reconciled with the gold definitions.
Mm-hmm.
And now
Yeah.
my sole task is to reconcile the incoming story with stories with the gold stories.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which heightens the point is the gold definitions is the output from the conflict detection at the reconciliation stage, and
No,
then
no.
you can derive gold stories because
The gold definitions were already there. The gold definitions were already there, right?
But what's different from stories from definitions?
Stories are the interplay of definitions.
The definitions imply the interplay. You can derive, and I've just shown you on the screen, you can derive user stories trivially from a well-crafted definitions.
The stories, we say stories a lot when we talk.
Mm-hmm.
You can't derive the stories that we talk about from the definitions using an AI.
We talk about stories a lot, which is an input, and what we're trying to do is to have a single source of BaseRock truth where that's agreed. And
okay, so you want to leave off stories from the BaseRock?
It's all the extract information. The input is all good. The reconciliation should be against the definitions only. And gold stories.
The reconciliation of what should be against the definitions only.
Our conversations, accounts data, anything, news data, anything you want, goes through reconciliation to say, does this logically invalidate anything in the definitions? And then we go to the conflict detection, and we have to figure out whether meat brains want to change the definitions and so on. But gold tasks, gold stories, gold diagrams, gold pitch decks. These are all derived from one thing, which is the definitions.
They're not derived if they came in from the extracted source. You keep saying to me that gold stories are derived from gold definitions. Right?
Sure. I've just done
That's what you're saying, right?
I showed you.
Yeah, and I'm repeatedly showing you that there are other stories that carry valuable information that are not derived from the definitions.
Yes, but that is above the reconciliation, right? That's the extract information piece you're talking about there.
Yeah, and then we keep a record of all these gold stories because as humans, we're going to say a range of different stories, and some of them will be duplicates of other ones that have already come before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so those are
some conflict as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and so those incoming stories need to be reconciled with our agreed record of gold stories.
Is it the case that what you're arguing for really, or one way of squaring this, is moving gold stories into gold definitions? Because
well, they're still different to a definition, but they are gold. I mean, that whole layer is gold. You could ditch gold tasks, right. But all I'm trying to imply by saying gold is that the wording's all coherent. It's all deduplicated.
Right, okay. All right. Here's a suggestion then. Right. I think this might the conflict detection needs to be followed up, but this is a derived diagram, so fine. If you put a box around gold definitions, gold stories, gold tasks, like what you're talking about is what I'm talking about there. It's like that's the thing that is the topic that this whole new information is discussing. And if it's got some stories,
so the box should really be anything that has the word gold in it and you can ignore gold tasks because, I mean, we could live without tasks. That's just there for convenience of tracking things that we have to do because we
Yeah.
sort of go over that a lot, right?
Yeah.
Right. So the definitions, gold definitions means the reconciled, self-coherent, as best we know. This is what you and I agree are our definitions for this topic of the Dreamcatcher,
Right. Right.
right?
And
Gold
the
stories then are what you and I agree has been reconciled using only the language of the gold definitions and represents a deduplicated list of stories that we think represent the behavior we want to see of the system.
right now, put a box around gold definitions and gold stories to contain them in, I don't know, golden. Let's call it.
Mm.
Um, golden is what you're reconciling against.
Yeah,
It
whenever
includes the
something new
definition.
comes in, you need to
Yeah.
reconcile against it because the gold layer represents the combined reconciliation of all the information that has been inducted prior.
Right, right. And, the format of the definitions I've got at the moment, I've just made up, right?
Yep.
Yeah, we could stick stories in there. Sure. We can stick whatever is going to help.
But a
dedupe
story,
and make
but a
its
story is
title.
not a definition, though. That's there's a
Well, maybe
distinction between what a
it's,
story is. A story
yeah.
is the dynamic behavior, and the definitions are the static
Well,
facts of the system.
this is kind of why I've been talking about a very, very ironically poorly defined term, base rock. Can I take over the screen? Oh, so
Sure.
can I show you what I mean? So the definitions, I made up this format, right? It's like I've added in the views into those definitions, and well, who knows whether that's the right place to do it?
Can you
Probably not.
before you launch into this, can you give me a
Yeah.
summary of what you're trying to achieve, what your point is with it?
Yes. Thank you for reminding me for a conversation the other day. What I'm trying to show is that the definitions here are defined relatively arbitrary in terms of I made these field names up.
You mean the format of the definitions?
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
we could easily add in stories into that. But
Why?
concept-
Why do you want to add it to what's so bad about keeping it separate?
oh, no, by separate, do you mean different files?
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Okay, so what's the
Um,
point? What's the problem then?
the problem I was driving at is you always go back to golden, and you don't do a second order derivative because that second order derivative.
What's a
whenever you start
second order
commenting,
derivative?
I take the golden and give me a set of stories. Ignore the golden, and I'm just using the stories now in order to do another set of user stories, and I've added stuff in, and then
Why?
I'm going to.
Who came up with that idea?
That's what I thought you were implying.
And how many times did I tell you that wasn't?
The thing is, you were talking about generating user stories from transcripts as if those were golden. They're not golden. They are interesting that need to be inputted. The golden piece is
And you see the reconciliation box that comes before getting an extracted story into a gold story.
which is
Right.
the conflict resolution is below reconciliation on the same level as the separate gold stories, gold definitions, and so on. I'm saying that these are actually one conceptual thing, golden box around the whole thing, and the conflict resolution needs to deal with the entire thing because it needs to be self-coherent. They can't diverge.
I don't think those distinctions really make a difference to what we're doing. I'm not sure why you're arguing about this, because it seems.
I'm not arguing. I'm testing this. I'm testing the.
Well, it sounds
size
like
of
an
this.
argument, and yet I'm failing to grasp what really is the distinction here, because we sort of get down to it, and then you're like, oh well, it sounds the same.
Well, if you go back to, you want to take the.
Does it? Is it the same?
The diagram is misleading because it
Misleading
looks
how?
like ghost stories are an entity, as a thing, a separate thing.
They are a
Um,
thing. I showed you the
and
files and I showed you the
gold
files in
gold definitions are a separate thing.
yeah.
Um, when reconciliation happens, it needs to happen on a box around both those things. If we add in user stories or indeed views,
Okay, well,
definitions of views and so on.
do you want to make yourself a diagram and then come back to me about how you think the diagram should go? Because I'm not really sure that it's fruitful to burn so much time on a diagram that was generated. It's clearly not working to get across the concepts I wanted, and it seems no
No, but
longer beneficial.
taking a step back, it's really interesting because what we've got is a generated diagram that uh, is a render of transcripts, and we are having a discussion now that I think we're starting to converge on.
I,
But
I feel like we're further apart than ever.
really,
So why don't you? Yep.
why?
What I mean, how you're going on about stuff that doesn't make sense to me. Like it just you're like half of it's the same, and then suddenly you say things that are like, what? That's wildly off. And then
Yeah, but no, you don't see the value in that though.
no,
Yeah,
I don't, because I was all I was doing was I was like I found a way to explain the massive information that we have and that we generate on the regular. I found a way that made sense to me to reconcile that.
all right. I think I need to apologize. I wasn't meaning to be so vocal on this one. You put in information and rendered, and the whole point of rendering is the meat brains get going and try to figure out a common understanding, and then put that back into, golden. And this is like it's almost an example of why it's useful. All right. And I do apologize if it was too vocal on that one. I got maybe a bit overexcited, but the whole point of it is something was generated that we could actually talk about in, the nuts and brass of it.
The deeper problem that I'm trying to address is that you are going round and round here, burning a lot of tokens, time, and effort, and yet I'm not seeing something that I can stand upon and build upon, because you are at, for example, traceable at number 25 or something, and I'm not seeing stability emerge. I glimpsed stability today after finding a new tool that did a lot of the work that you are copying and pasting from. I don't really care about this version that I've seen. I care about any version that gives us stability, that we can reach mutual understanding of what the logic of the system is, because we don't have that yet. We have it in our discussions, and when you and I talk, we feel like we agree because we have a few hiccups, but we more or less are talking the same thing. But we don't have that written down anywhere that's a single reference point of truth that we can put forwards and say, here it is. Now we've got this tool that looks a little bit like the Dreamcatcher, or more like some of the aspects of Artifact that we spoke about. And I've done a preliminary walk through it, and this is a first attempt at giving us a place to stand. I called the place to stand gold, and then suffixed it with the different types of information that I find valuable. You may find different types of information valuable, but what I implore you to do is come up with any kind of reference system for us so that we can have a place to stand, because I am tired of being vague.
That place to stand is the base rock I've been banging on about.
Well, you've banged on about it, but you haven't got it. So
no, I've committed to it. It's there. It's
no, it's
on
not.
The screen.
We're
talking about Dreamcatcher definitions, which is something to refine and improve and tighten up and dedupe.
I can't work with it when it's in a file that's 13,000 tokens long.
So all I need to do is to break it out into different files. I'm not change the word. I mean, I can do that. That's easy enough.
Well, yeah, but then that's your version of it, and then you and I need to reconcile to get to something that we agree on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is this loop that we're going through now. Absolutely. So the this conversation is only fruitful if it results in an improvement to the golden. Let's include user stories, whatever we want to include into this one, but then dedupe it, make sure it's self-coherent. But then we're talking about exactly what you're asking for, which is coming to a common view.
Okay, so how are you going to come to a common view then? Because how are you going to come to a common view? How do we come to a common view?
The tool cursor is useful, yeah, absolutely, but that is not the logical view of what we're trying to do. The logical view should be expressible in many ways. One tool does not define it. It's just a useful way of doing it. This structure is the thing that we should be
which structure?
Discussing. The one that's on the screen right now. And if it includes user stories, cool, fine. If it needs to be into a hierarchy of files to make it useful and more ingestible,
okay, well,
fine.
Is the format that you want to present the reference set of definitions for us to work from? Is this large single file what you want to present?
Well, last call we were talking about, I was asking whether it should be just a heap, and you're going, yes, it's heap, but now we're talking about files. I think that's more sensible. I think we fragment that into a hierarchy because there's implied information in the hierarchy. And the wording inside of it is the actual gold. I mean, when we talk about a Dreamcatcher platform, for example, is that what we're talking about?
And how would you expect to receive feedback from me and detect conflicts from me about this file?
We take things like this conversation when we're talking about is rather useful, I think, to render it. I show you diagrams and you go, whoa.
Render what?
For example, context diagram, sequence diagram,
okay,
any diagram that you want.
And then, what happens then?
Then we exactly the same as your thoughts around the improvement. That is information at the top, and then we have the reconciliation. These talks are.
And then this file gets updated in some way.
Yeah, or this hierarchy of files. Yeah.
Okay, and how do I update or propose an update to the files? Rather than just talking to you about a render. How do I directly edit this thing?
Well, it's there. It's editable. You can just go directly in and do it. Then the thing I'd do is do an A/B, a before and after. So it's like, well, you've proposed a bunch of changes. Does that break anything? Is anything weird? It's useful, as we were talking about 3 or 4 calls ago, to talk in renders as opposed to trying to wordsmith, text files in a hierarchy of files or in a single heap. Doesn't matter.
All right, and is this large file the only file that you want to present as the reference information that we should agree upon?
Yes, and by large file, I don't care if it's a large file or a hierarchy of files in a folder.
Yeah. But what you're saying is this file here is what you want to start with as the thing to be debated about?
Yes.
And where in this file is the behaviors of the system, like how it behaves when it's in motion or dynamically?
we generate, using this file, we generate a system, we look at those behaviors and go, that's not what we meant.
So you want to take this file and you want to treat the behaviors as something that gets rendered from it.
Yeah.
And what happens if I think of a behavior that isn't in the rendering that I think should be possible from the definitions? What happens then?
Then what you mean is unrenderable?
Unrendered. Like, if you're going to derive the stories from the definitions and I come up with a story that's not included in that set of rendered stories, what happens then?
That's fine. What we're talking about is, here's a story that is currently uncovered, not covered by the definition. Then we go, okay, well, let's add it in, let's model it.
Add it in, add the story in.
Yeah, and then let's model it and see what
But
happens.
you said there's no stories in the definitions.
No, because stories you can derive stories.
But you just said add the story in. You said add the story in.
If you want, I think it might be an idea to add them.
Add them where?
Thing.
Add them to this file?
Into this, yeah. So remember, what I was saying is I just made up this format, right?
Yes, I know, but you were very, very strong about the fact that stories were only ever derived or generated or rendered from the definitions.
No, right? I was talking about the stories derived from a transcript without going back to actually what we're talking about.
So you're saying there is another file that's complementary to this that includes some stories that have been derived from these definitions?
That would be an interesting thing, actually. So if we had a conversation and we saying, okay, so assume the discussion, you derive the user stories, and it conflicts, then that conflict is a useful thing. Now, the question is whether we include it in this, or maybe it should be in a different system entirely. But that conflict is a really is the only value is where there is a disagreement, because we all agree, happy days, home and time for tea and meadows, but we need to be talking about the same thing. So if you were to come up with a completely new user story, and we ran it through the Golden.
And hang on. We're not talking about Golden. We're talking about your system that you've got here, right?
I don't have a system. This is
just, you said this file is the thing you want to start off as the thing that is to be reconciled. This is the reference definitions.
That's my proposal at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so let's just work with that. You're saying that you would render some user stories, and then I would come up with one that wasn't in the rendering.
Yeah.
And you said add it in.
Yeah.
Add it in where? To this file?
You would take this file and add in the user story. You'd ask the AI, does this contradict anything? Are there any problems? And you go, okay, no, fine. Let's fork it, and let's add in the user, and let's render some actual uses of it. Is there anything weird? No, that's all fine. Okay, then it's included.
So you're saying that right now in this reference file, there are no stories in here, and you've only been working with derived stories entirely.
Yeah, because what I'm looking to do is actually ultimately dedupe this file as small as possible in order to contain the same amount of information.
Yeah, and you're saying that there may be a point in the future where the derived user stories are insufficient because a story that isn't derivable from the definitions is proposed, and in that case you would want to insert the essence of that story into this file, and so now this file contains definitions plus this novel story.
Yeah. And
And
that's the innovation human meat side of it, because
right. So
this,
why? So if it's pretty clear to me that in your file here, there's
mhm,
no such thing as a story.
because it's not seemed necessary up to this point,
Yeah,
but it might be
yeah. And
necessary.
then I'm saying that I just gave you an example where you can plausibly see that it would be necessary to add an entirely different type of data where
Hmm.
the things you've got at the moment are all definitions. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
But
then the story, the novel story that we would need to add must use the definitions to tell its story that can't be derived solely from the definitions alone, right?
which is the new thing, yeah.
Right.
And
Okay. And
the
so I'm saying to you, surely it makes sense to store a different type of data, honoring its difference as a separate thing to this file that contains only definitions right now.
um, well, given the box, I mean, I think you might have a point. Um, if you put a box around this definitions doc and the user stories doc, and you call that golden, then what I'm talking about is golden. The golden needs to be self-coherent, absolutely self-coherent, and then you can model changes to it. And you say, what if I were to add in this new user story? What if I were to add in this new definition? And we don't necessarily need to limit ourselves from that.
So what I think golden means is it's novel information, or information that is not derivable from anywhere else. It has no duplicates. It's minimized, but it's the novelty required to generate everything else or derive everything else about the system.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And
Yeah.
I think what I'm struggling with you is that there is a form of dynamic information that is novel, or golden as we just defined, that is essential to defining the operation of a system, because any given system, its behavior when it's running cannot be deduced solely from its behavior at rest alone.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because we've been talking about this format that I've got up here, which is almost a straw man, and user stories, which people have been using for years. Um, but you could easily put in, you could conceive of different ways of defining actually what it's meant to be doing. For example, a golden path in terms of a diagram. That would be another way of defining it. There, there are many ways of defining it, but the fundamental is when it goes into the golden, that's what we're talking about as a unit, and that's what we test against for any changes.
Are we in agreement that we can have two classes of golden data? One is the static data, which is definitions, and the other is the dynamic data, which uses the definitions, and the novelty is the definitions in motion. So how the running system is.
I would, yes, without
Yes,
nitpicking. Yes,
without
I'm not going to
nitpicking.
nitpick on that one.
Okay,
There's definitely a nit to pick there, but yeah, basically, yeah.
right. Because a dynamic system cannot be described without its static components. And you can
Right.
describe a static system at rest fully with its static components.
Right.
But our system is a running system, and so the dynamic nature of it requires a different kind of information from the static information. and that's the stories part, the dynamic
It's
information.
but the dynamic information could also be um, a, s- a statement of this happened, and it could be as complex as you want, and that is correct and is also coherent. And there's an example.
I think it's true to additionally mention that given the static definition of a system, you could imply a large amount of its dynamic behavior,
Yeah.
but it is impossible to imply all of its dynamic behavior.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
Because where's the additional information coming from? If you think about this in abstract,
in mechanics
it's
terms, statics and
um,
dynamics is the way I'm
well,
thinking about it.
exactly. It's people using it. It's people putting in stuff where the cat runs over their keyboard. It's a server going down. Um, all this noise. That is the dynamic running version of it.
Yeah,
And when you compile it down, the golden box around all these things should be able to handle it. And if it's
yeah.
inconsistent, it's the inconsistency that is the thing, the key to the innovation. If it's if Meat Brain comes up with a new thing that it should do and it doesn't do, then it's the definitions that change, not the Meat Brain.
It might be the meat brain if the meat brain imagined wrong.
Sure, but so if, yeah, yes, basically. But the point is, if there's an innovation, let's say if it's a correct innovation that you want to add in a new function or capability into the golden, it has to be consumed into the golden because
It has to be reconciled against the
right.
static data contained in the golden definitions and the dynamic data contained within the golden stories.
Yeah,
Yeah?
because tomorrow when you start talking about it, you don't know what you're talking about, because it's changed.
Okay, well, look, if we agree on that, then I think that if you ignore the diagrams I drew and the work I did today, if we can agree on that fundamental principle, then that's what I was trying to do.
Okay, good. I think we're converging now. That's good. And again, I do apologize for being vocal, but there is something. I think there's a really important golden thing that we've unlocked here, which is how do you get AIs that are going to be updating models constantly and so on, that are all backward looking with derived information to interact with humans who come up with new shit, and but you still want to have something coherent that
Yeah, and
doesn't
the
fall
only
over.
way you're gonna do that is a reconciliation process.
Right, right, exactly.
And I think the key that you highlighted with the reasoner workbench concept is that whenever a derived work from the reference information is found to be an error, instead of correcting it directly, you should be correcting the reference information,
Yes, and
right?
can I add on I'll talk with less um, decibels. um, Taking derived information and then using that as your base rock is just amplifying errors.
Yes, I know that, and I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Cool. Yes, I'm sorry we took so long, but I think this was a useful conversation um, because having something to talk about, which both parties agree this is the state now, and now we're looking at uh, new information coming in. Without having state now, we're we're passing in the night. We might be talking about different things, but you have to be talking about a thing now in order to talk about the impact or the inclusion of something that's new.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Was I a bit obstreperous there? I'm sorry if I
Well, you're
was.
just repeating yourself. You're saying the same thing
I don't
again
know.
and again, and I'm like, I don't. When you say the same thing again, I take that to mean that I missed something. Because
Yeah,
why else
well,
would you say it?
I think you were missing things with respect. I think you were missing things, which was that user stories out is just part of Golden. This definition format is just a part of Golden, but together that is what we're talking about. And it gives us something solid to actually say, if we were to do this, let's model it, and then the renders will show us
Yep.
weirdness. And it's
I
like,
feel like that's what I presented this whole evening long.
okay. I did not get that. It doesn't matter which direction.
Okay.
Probably, I did not get that. I'm very humble in my inability to capture nuance, but this golden box is
Yeah.
really
Really,
important.
all I want is a set of reference material that we stand upon, and anything new that occurs needs to be reconciled against the existing um, reference material before it's included or allowed to change the reference material in any way.
Very
That's
well
what I'm
said.
after.
Yes,
That's what I'm
yes,
after.
yes. Precisely said. And
Okay.
we can dedupe
All
and
right. So how are we going to
compress
get
this.
to a working operating agreement between you and me for how that's going to happen? I've put forward one view. It didn't land very well, if I'm being honest. But that doesn't mean that the need for a system is not there. So how do we get? Do you want to put forward a system for working and reconciling together, or like
I,
how do
I
we
I
proceed?
would I would like I propose, I don't know whether this is right, we'll see, but I propose that the best way is that we have some format which includes what you're doing, but we're saying that is the state, and then we talk about renders. So it's like here's a use case. Does that conflict? Does
Okay,
that break?
I'm looking for a concrete implementation. I'm looking for a thing that I can use now. Is that
Yeah,
possible?
yeah, we could do that.
Okay, so shall we reconvene tomorrow and we can go through the next iteration of what that system's going to be?
Yeah. Can I
Because
give you a straw man before you go?
well, everything's a straw
Uh,
man. No, not before I go. It's very late and I need to exit. But
yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
um, what you agree that we need a system, right? Like before we have Artifact, we actually have enough tools now with Cursor, I believe, to have a low overhead reference material, a reasoner, in effect.
Yes, it's a useful tool. Other tools may exist. Other tools will emerge. Right now, yeah, sure, let's do it. But it doesn't alter anything at the logical layer of what we've been talking about.
I'm not talking about the
Um,
logical layer. I'm talking about the actual working implementation of it. We don't have that. We need it.
so would you yes, if we're to use cursor, then we're talking about files.
You don't have to
Uh,
use cursor if that's the sort of the what's the
well,
word,
no,
the hypothetical situation you wanted to make clear. But um, it I think it has to be GitHub with files, right? And it's
uh,
really just a debate about how we structure those files more than anything, I think.
yeah, because we could do it hand cranked as we've been doing,
Yeah, because even when we
moving
have
back and
Artifact,
forwards.
even when we have Artifact, it's still going to be files,
Yeah,
and so
yeah,
these
yeah,
formats are still valid.
yeah. It's only two things: it's
Um,
text files and
yeah,
elements.
I was celebrating that we can actually have a system that we can use where the overhead of using it isn't greater than the benefit we get from it. And to me, Cursor gave that to me. I'm not saying that has to have given it to you. But since we
Well,
have this,
I'm not just saying cursor, by the way, because
right?
I'm like a noob.
Yeah, but
It seems cool. Seems cool.
we should be able to get this reference thing or reference knowledge up and running. And I would say within the next, probably by the weekend, we should be able to have ourselves version 1 of the reference information and a process by which you and I can induct new things to it, detect conflicts with new stuff and existing stuff, and reconcile. And if we can do that, then we're incrementing, we're moving forwards, because we aren't right now. And I'm not trying to have a go at either of us for that, but I'm saying that surely you'd agree that if we can get to stable plus incrementing, that's the thing to do, right?
Well, the here's a scenario that I'd like to see, is on these calls. We are in a conversation. I think you pointed this out. When we're talking, an AI is like picking up where either of us are being
that was the whole point. That was that's what this thing does. This thing does, because
exactly. But the thing is,
it's not doing it real time
to
right
point
now.
out. Well, to point out where we're going wrong, it needs to know what right is.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do, I suggest, is this heap is expensive to ingest and so on, and it feels like there's some kind of hierarchy where hierarchy of files that has implied knowledge. A user folder implies that there's definition of a user, and everything inside of that user folder is a user, and then you got a funder, you got talent, you got consumer, and so on, and inherits from that. That would break it down so that when we're talking about, consumers, then it goes down and just brings that into context, and answers our questions. And our questions where we conflict is the real value. It's like, okay, so as a consumer, I want to do that. You can't do that. It's like, well, is that a good thing to do, and so on. So that structure seems to be the thing that would be the most useful. And it's as a start for 10, I can deconstruct this big heap into an implied folder. And that would allow user stories also to go into the implied folder. The top level folder is golden. That's the thing that we're talking about as, base rock. Everything beneath that is the state now, and that's what we're talking about.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do.
Yeah.
I'll keep refining this system that I have concocted here by trying to ingest the additional discussions that we have had tonight, and I'll see what that kicks out.
Okay.
Why don't you try and come up with a system that produces a set of reference material that we can iterate on too? You're welcome to use the stuff I've made. You're welcome to have your own stuff. And I can help you with any questions that you might have about how you might use Cursor or not use Cursor to get it. But so either way, one way or another, we need to come to agreement, you and me, on how we're going to build a reference system and iterate on it. We have to have that.
So let me check. I'm not entirely sure I've got you. Right, your task is to take the information or the definition and use cases and additional inputs from transcripts into whatever format that you want, hierarchy inside of.
So I've invented what I think is a reference format, a reference layout, and a process by which the reference material is iterated forwards or reconciled with incoming new information. And I think it's of benefit to me to keep doing that because it helps me understand what this system is, rather than it being free floating and just.
That's grand. So on my part, I can generate and think about challenges to that golden. I mean, what would it mean in terms of taking transcripts or call records from a running system, or any source, in order to input that, in order to do renders, so that you can have meat brains decide, do we need to change golden?
Okay, so you come up with that system, and then we'll have another shot at understanding how to merge the two systems together and have one system.
Yes. So you're on structuring. I'm on use.
Well, no, we're both on the same thing, because we can't. The way I'm doing it doesn't sit right with you, and that's fine. You've got a system that you've worked on for some time with a bunch of information, and that's fine too. But you need to figure out a way that we can cooperate on that system.
Well,
right?
let's just assume it's a cursor, because that.
Yeah,
that
but
tool,
no, but that's just the tool. I mean, the format and the process by which the induction occurs.
Okay. So, for example, if I were to put in some time in some kind of knowledge graph or hierarchy that together is golden, is that a useful thing to do?
I don't know, because all I know is that we need a reference system by which we can both agree on what reference is. We can draw on it for our different tasks. Mine is writing code, yours is writing prompts. And then we have a process by which it gets updated. I don't much care what that system is. It needs to make sense to me. It needs to make sense to you. I pray that there's an overlap in there somewhere.
Well, I think actually we're probably going to, if you were to go off to one room, I was to do another one, I think we'd probably come up with the same thing, which would be, let's chunk this down.
All right. So, I mean, one way I can see of beginning the merge is if you give me your best version of that big file, and then I can break it down into this system, and we can toy around with how it looks here, because me taking a derivative of your reference material doesn't hurt you none, I don't think. And then I can sort of show you what it looks like in this system. I don't know the answer. I know we need this system. I don't know what is the most effective thing for you to do to get there.
I think if I mean we're really talking about information theory here. I think it. So I know your time's short. Maybe I should write this down and send it over. But
yeah, let's do that.
It does seem like a knowledge graph. It's a knowledge graph, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure, but because a graph is different from a tree.
Yes.
It seems like a tree to me, because you can't have anything circular.
No, but you if you have a tree, you can still have associations between peers.
Okay, look,
okay.
you do it your way, and then we'll reconvene tomorrow and reconcile again. Okay?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Stop the recording and then upload.
Yeah.